Caroline is a graduate of architecture and social science. Duncan is a horticulturalist. They started the journey you're about to hear in 2009.
Before we start, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank those who've made this event possible. The Bayswater Urban Tree Network, the Stirling Urban Tree Network, Victoria Park Urban Tree Network, the City of Bayswater, and of course Chris Cornish. We'd also like to thank Costa for flying non-stop across the country and back again in a 24-hour period to support this event. Costa became an integral part of the Urban Food Street story when he turned up one wet afternoon a few years back, unannounced, to celebrate the delivery of our first neighbourhood beehive. And finally, we'd like to pause for a moment in respect to a grove of 8-year-old fully laden fruit trees that lost their life 3 months ago today. Those trees are growing socially and environmentally sustainable suburban plays. We've got a fabulous video of those trees being chipped and chopped at the hands of our local council, recorded by one of our tribe, a lovely resident of our neighbourhood. We broadcast that deplorable act, both locally and nationally, every month on the anniversary of the loss of those trees over Facebook. We're happy to name and shame and will continue to do that until our next local government election in around 2 years' time. Thanks for coming tonight. This is our story. And as we move around the Urban Food Street neighbourhood, a small map has been provided at the bottom of some slides so that you can locate where we are in the neighbourhood. Allow me to situate the project for you both geographically and contextually. The project site is located in Queensland, 100 kilometres north of Brisbane on the Sunshine Coast. The project takes life in this small residential neighbourhood in Buderim. With 620 people per square kilometre, the Buderim population density in this area is low. The project occurs in the heart of sprawling suburbia. The neighbourhood consists of 11 residential streets. We have approximately 220 households and about 1,000 people. Diversity of housing stock ranges from one small person flats to large family homes. The site is bordered by a childcare centre in the east and a state primary school in the south. The project boundaries are informed by topographical and built environment features, an escarpment in the north and west, a main road in the east and a primary school in the south. Our interest lies with existing suburban neighbourhoods and the ever-growing occupied edge, the phenomena of suburbanisation and the social suburban isolation that exists in the Australian context. Our focus is on creating a sustainable suburban place, environmentally and socially, with sustainable being understood importantly as having both a physical and social dimension. We give rise to the environmental and social value of Australia's vast network of suburban nature strips and sidewalks. The urban food street model isn't applicable in all suburban settings. Like finely tuned architecture, it is site-specific. Every suburban location is different and should be understood and treated as such. Informed by Vincent Gallart's The Self-Sufficient City, the model moves beyond the static imperatives and mechanical application of the bureaucratic process to rethink how we can flexibly and economically give meaning to the dormant suburban resources around us, adding intrinsic value to the lives of those that utilise this vast area of public space. Spatially, we understand a neighbourhood as a territorial unit of physical proximity. That territory has an urban aesthetic. It has a physical dimension that shapes its public space persona. Socially, we understand it as a place that is created by the number of amicable public space interactions and opportunities that occur amongst those that use that territory. The key word being here is amicable. A territory for us is understood as an area that can be crossed on foot in a maximum of 30 minutes. The distance from the centre of the Urban Food Street neighbourhood to its outer boundary is between 200 and 500 metres. Design for walkability understands this as a manageable distance on foot for most people. In reality, it takes a healthy person about 12 uninterrupted minutes to comfortably walk the distance from one end of this neighbourhood to the other. We'll put up a few tips, which are kind of the way that the Urban Food Street neighbourhood evolved. And our first tip is territory, and that really is about when does the physical size of an area cease to be perceived as an extension of your home. Define your territory. It might be your street, the end of your cul-de-sac or your block. Don't make it too big. Make sure that the territory feels like an extension of your home. But let's start from the very beginning. We don't have photos from 2009. We didn't expect what we were doing to develop into anything, so we didn't take any. It was 2009. The price of a line was $2. Ken Marr, recipient of the Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal for 2009, was calling for an architecture that reflects life at a deeper level. We had a simple idea based on the notion that resilient and cohesive neighbourhoods for those designed around sustainable outcomes. $2 was expensive for a single line. We decided that nature does sustainability well. Sustainability was intrinsically embedded in that line. It made sense to grow our own. We knew that we could grow limes and that once the lime tree matured, we'd have more limes than two people could possibly eat. Australian suburbia had a very ordinary energy, socially and aesthetically. By using food as a catalyst and growing it on the suburban street edge, we imaged a future where social, environmental and health sustainability was integrated by design as an urban aesthetic into the day-to-day collective existence of those who lived in the streets around us. Interested in Vincent Goulard's notion of the self-sufficiency, we saw an opportunity to demonstrate the possibilities of growth when we reject what is dictated through status quo thinking and assume a suburban alternative. Duncan had a chat with our neighbour John about growing citrus trees on the street edge. And later that year, we planted 24 citrus trees along one side of our street in which we lived. They spanned our entire block. Understanding function, we set these well back from the street edge of the roadway to enable room for a parked car and the pedestrian user. The trees grew and produced large quantities of beautiful spray-free fruit. As an all-inclusive project model taking place in public space, we encouraged anyone that lived within the 11 streets to pick freely from the once-a-year crop. Within the context of a defined territory, you envisaged suburban public space that was unbiased in every respect. There was one neighbourhood rule: take only what you needed as a family for your next meal. Tip 2, distribution. Be open to giving. Edible species planted in public space are public space amenity. You may have planted it, grown it and maintained it, but that doesn't entitle you individually to own it. People will help themselves to edibles grown in this way. Maybe you've been watching that verge-grown pumpkin swell for weeks in anticipation of eating it, only to find that someone else has picked it and it wasn't someone from within your neighbourhood. Be open to others taking the produce because part of the process of growing an active neighbourhood involves people picking the crop. Challenge your language and educate others. Give stealing another name. We had very little redistribution in the urban First Street neighbourhood, but on the occasions that we did come across someone from outside the neighbourhood helping themselves, they were usually in a desperate situation. They needed it, and we were, as a neighbourhood, more than happy to supply it. We were a small neighbourhood doing suburban life differently. We couldn't supply the entire Sunshine Coast with free food. We discouraged those from outside the 11 streets from picking, but at the end of the day, we couldn't stop this completely. We accepted that some of what we grew would be redistributed beyond the territory of the neighbourhood. In the overall scheme of the project, losses, be they food or damage to verge plants, were minimal. For those who lived within the neighbourhood, distribution was done by urban foraging. We wanted people out and about using our streets and enjoying the streets, so daily picking was encouraged. Harder to pick items such as bananas were harvested centrally and then distributed to families throughout the hood. This was done either as a draw drop or at monthly working bees. Neighbourhood confidence grew with the trees and people picked from the crop, but we noticed that families travelling from the outer perimeter were less likely to engage, despite this being a manageable distance on foot. We were in our infancy. Within the constraints of the neighbourhood and the infant idea, we'd inadvertently centralised the crop. Centralisation meant that those on the outer edges had to travel to participate, and whilst this was manageable, we generally found that those from the periphery were less likely to engage. In plan, it looked like this. Nonetheless, the people of this neighbourhood fell in love with the idea that a lime, lemon, mandarin or orange was only a few streets away, and that you could pick freely from the ripening crop. Food unites people. People relate to it. It wasn't long before others wanted to join in. The opportunity to distribute the crops around the neighbourhood evolved with expressions of interest. Truly organic in nature, we didn't have a concrete plan as such. We transitioned organically from centralisation to a system of suburban distribution as participation allowed. The model hinged on fresh produce being physically easy and socially rewarding for people to source. To achieve this, the model had to understand the convenience of distance, promote chance social encounters, and be aware of the many nuances of site. The neighbourhood was made up of 3 networks within a territory, but within those 3 networks it had just over 200 potential sites. Every verge location was a site on its own and had its own site considerations. Distribution meant that we viewed the neighbourhood as a group of self-sustaining networks operating within the context of the whole and looked at the micro-influences of each and every site. Crops were distributed across the neighbourhood for the convenience of all, and we built our other resources, such as verge composting locations around this understanding. It looked like this. Tip 3, site. Understand as much as you can about your specific site. Orientation, soil quality, drainage, shade, vehicle traffic, pedestrianism, rainfall, animals, and the list goes on. We overlay this with the social potential of your site. The Urban Food Street neighbourhood dug a children's verge garden at one end of the cul-de-sac in a street without curb and channel. No curb and channel gave the street universality. This meant that it was fit for use, regardless of age or ability. It was universal by design. This end of the street serviced 7 houses. It was a no-through road. Traffic was almost non-existent, hence the environment was largely safe for children to use. This was the perfect location for a children's garden. Neighbourhood behaviour moderated with the addition of the garden. What little traffic there was slowed naturally in recognition of the small people using this space, and this became a favoured meeting place for neighbourhood families and events. The kids loved it. The social potential of that site and the family that lived in that home spoke to a children's garden, so this is what we did. Late in 2012, an entire street expressed an interest in growing something, and the opportunity to produce decent quantities of spray-free bananas was too good to miss. Early in 2013, the neighbourhood planted both sides of Stephen Street to licensed miniature Asian varieties. They grew quickly, and the street quickly assumed a new name. Banana Street was born. In plan, it looked like this. Collectively as a neighbourhood, we tended and cared for those bananas. They grew good quantities of spray-free fruit, and in 2015, we harvested 900 kilos from that one street location. They were instrumental both aesthetically and functionally in facilitating cohesive neighbourhood relations. The planting of Banana Street was a real turning point for this neighbourhood, and rates of participation significantly increased once we did this. By late 2016, the neighbourhood was preparing the soil for a second banana location, and a third was under discussion. Bananas were popular in this neighbourhood. Within 3 years of planting the new location, an annual production of 3,000 kilograms was estimated. As a distributed model, it looked like this. One banana location in each of the 3 networks. So there's the one in the bottom, the large stretch in the middle, and one at the top. We replicated this for olives, planting 28 trees as a collective effort in one afternoon in April 2015. Added to the 6 trees that were planted as a trial in 2012, the neighbourhood verge-grown olive plantation now housed 34 trees. They were distributed across the 3 neighbourhood networks. In plan, it looked like this. We planted avocados down a quiet pedestrian lane and watched them grow intergenerational connection between unrelated families. People were out and about talking to one another, aware of who lived next door, across the road, 3 streets away, and at the other end of the neighbourhood. The neighbourhood was a hive of social interaction as people transgressed the territory foraging for food to pick and eat. People knew that Cindy lived alone and was 90 plus years old. They'd stop by to say hello and drop a bag of fresh picked produce. Cindy formed connections, not possible without the catalyst of food. She became one of our greatest supporters. In plan, it looked like this. As a neighbourhood, we dug a growing space with the children, for the children, in a quiet cul-de-sac, and populated it with things that kids love to eat. It soon became known as the Kids' Garden. We left plenty of room for the pedestrian user. Tip 4 is about wayfinding. So create your own place-specific suburban language. Recognise locality and name it. Celebrate areas for what they are, and understand that naming a location personalises it and provides a suburban language associated with wayfinding that means something to the people of your neighbourhood. It creates an association and deeper relationship with place. It is placemaking. It connects people where they live. Tell any child in the Urban Food Street neighbourhood that something was happening in the kids' garden and they knew exactly where to be. Everyone knew everyone, and casual afternoons in the kids' garden became a bit of a thing. We'd defined the new park. As a distributed model, in plan, it looked like this. The neighbourhood used dormant space to bring interest. A bunch of herbs was never more than a few streets away. Things were extremely safe in our street. You could confidently send your children to pick them. The neighbourhood grew corn and tropical apples and planted a very productive market garden. People walked on the road. Very little of this neighbourhood has council provided footpaths. The streets are quiet. Historically, and in the absence of the footpath, people have always walked on the edge of the road. In plan, it looked like this. The neighbourhood delivered avocados, ginger, turmeric and galangal, and beautiful spray-free verge-growing cabbages. The neighbourhood delivered a project and project outcomes unprecedented in the Australian context, without the financial assistance of private or public sector money. And my tip 5 is own it. We owned it, and if nothing else, I hope that every government official, regardless of standing in this room tonight, hears this one point: own it. Never underestimate the potential of enabling a neighbourhood to own it. Move away from the mechanical application of constricting rules and regulations designed in recognition of monoculture, and enable people to forge a socially, environmentally and economically sustainable way forward. Create the setting that enables authority to get out of the way. There's not one top-down placemaking project in the Australian context that can boast the outcomes of Urban Food Street. There's a small council area in New Zealand that approaches the problem of insurance risk differently to Bayswater. Global models and examples of bureaucracy getting out of the way exist. Don't accept the status quo. Be socially innovative. Find a way to allow the people that create it to own it. And to those who create it, own it. Understand the construct within which you operate and own it. Understand that if you're growing bananas in Queensland, you do this within an important banana industry. Before you blindly plant a street of bananas, understand what you are doing. Bananas are susceptible to disease. Disease spreads quickly within the industry. Purchase accredited stock, be responsible, no shortcuts, no handing around suckers which might compromise the industry. Own it and own it mindfully. As a neighbourhood, we made use of every available resource, understanding that design for people and with people has both a physical and social dimension. We needed an undercover area to host events. This neighbourhood household offered that with street engagement. This became the neighbourhood's go-to event space. The space was available for use whether this family was home or not. A neighbourhood is full of resources. When relationships allow, utilise them. We built a model around the notion that everyone had something to give, no matter how big or small, and we valued every single contribution. Here, one of our neighbourhood mums and artists paints the children's face during the Verge Easter egg hunt and celebration. My tip 6 is contribute. Understand contribution. Maybe you can't turn the sod or garden, but you can bake a cake for the social event after a working bee, or deliver a cabbage during a harvest. Say hi to Cooper, born into this neighbourhood and 6 or 7 in this photo, and delivering one of the 300 verge-growing cabbages that were grown in 2015. One was delivered to each neighbourhood family. Understand contribution fluidly, not linearly. Move beyond the notion that one person is doing more than another and think about it organically. Maybe you don't attend the working bee, but you make jam for the verge-grown rosellas. Maybe you can't bend over to plant because of your back, but you allow the use of your town water to water newly planted seedlings. Maybe you live in the neighbourhood and own the local cafe. You contribute through the provision of bacon and egg rolls at the celebratory neighbourhood event, cooking them on your next door neighbour's barbecue. Understand contribution and don't measure it linearly. In the Urban Food Street neighbourhood, we don't value one form of contribution over another. People will and do and will move in and out of contribution according to life situation and family need. Allow that to happen. Next door's just had their first child and they've stopped attending working bees for a while. Isn't it wonderful? As a new child, and that the very action of that family walking that child along the street in a pram is bringing life, vitality and interest to the streets. We communicated via fence-mounted chalkboards and composted feverishly in pursuit of creating humus for our verge plants to thrive on. I'm not sure whether people know, but just 1% of humus added to soil equates to a hectare of soil, sorry, I should get this right. It equals 170,000 litres of extra water that soil can hold. We don't want to delve too deeply into soil culture, however it's pertinent to string together the soil, environmental, human health connection in a very basic manner. Soil health matters. Soils are a major contributor in fighting the effects of climate change. Global soils already hold 3 times as much carbon as exists in the atmosphere, and there's room for more. When we regenerate soils by striving to build rather than lose organic matter, there's a great outcome. Producing food becomes less stressful. The food becomes more nutrient dense with greater medical potential. We require less food to meet our daily nutrient needs, and we are countering the climate change by carbon sequestration. Not to mention that a soil that's full of organic matter holds more moisture. Plants require less water. A vital strategy in the Australian context, where in the most part it seems as though it's forgotten how to rain. An increase in just 1% humus over a hectare equates to the additional 170,000 litres of water being retained by that soil. The numbers are staggering. One of the first things that we invested in as a neighbourhood was verge-located composting bins. These enabled us to return as much green matter as possible to our verge soils and stop the cycle of important green waste leaving this neighbourhood. Neighbourhood families were enthusiastic. As a neighbourhood, we tended the existing verge beds and prepped holes for new plantings during monthly working bees. Participation rates were good, with 30 to 40 people on average contributing to this event. Notice I said contributing rather than attending. An entire army of contribution made each and every working bee happen. Our neighbourhood verges were growing lineally and botanically. As a collective, we couldn't keep up with those wanting to join in. Vegetable beds were highly productive, with this one location producing 2,400 units of winter greens in the months from June to September last year. Enhanced soils enabled this with very little water. Recent investigations by Robert McDougall, the only PhD student in Australia studying the productivity and ecology of urban farming systems, has found that per square metre, the verge-located growing space is 3 to 4 times more productive than the average commercial fruit and vegetable farm in Australia. Replicated across the scale of the neighbourhood, the suburban setting, if understood both physically and socially, had huge environmental and social and economic potential. The neighbourhood setting fed people with the freshest food around. Picked and eaten immediately, that food retained all of its phytonutrients. We celebrated collectively. Any reason to celebrate? We developed a street genre that nurtured the gathering of people in suburban public space, and we celebrated as a neighbourhood by doing just that. We gathered around food and provided an educative environment for all. People were out and about exploring our streets. We were always willing to talk to them. People brought interest and diversity. This photo is our local childcare centre, which about 3 or 4 years ago became fully engaged in the project, and the childcare centre would walk children into the neighbourhood and pick the excess food that we had and take it back to the centre, and it was cooked for their lunch. We welcomed them openly, always willing to share the fundamental elements of the project. They walked on the road, and in doing so we challenged the traditional role and function of the suburban street to bring new life and meaning to the way in which we occupied our suburban lot, keeping in mind that these are very quiet residential streets. They came from right across the world: New York, Japan, various parts of Europe, Taiwan and Australia. Town planners, government staff, soil scientists, environmentalists, psychologists and educators. They came looking for a different way of living in the suburbs. In plan, it looked like this. And in between all of that, the neighbourhood continued to distribute and grow the verge larder. We planted blueberries. Distribution of the resource should hopefully now be evident, but how does this relate to the greater context? The greater context is not defined by a sprawling periphery requiring endless demand on severely depleted resources, but by a set of self-sufficient networks. Each network is defined by a sustainable boundary, environmentally, socially, economically. Each has its own identity and produces for its own need. As individual resources, they operate without draining the resource of the surrounding system, yet each contributes to the overall sustainability of the whole. Together they combine to produce a powerful outcome that understands both habitability and interaction, an outcome that is environmentally, socially and economically sustainable in this context. By late 2016, the neighbourhood larder contained over 20 edible tree crop species, plus an ever-changing assortment of seasonal fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices. It looked like this. Today our suburban reality is much different. Let me illustrate this one other way. The image at the top of the screen is somewhere in Kawana on the Sunshine Coast. The new estate claims boldly to build community and lifestyle. On the day that we visited, we couldn't find either. Status quo thinking gives us this: barren urban environments, resource intensive and devoid of life. Public space represents community. It is the presentation of a society's ideas that operate within constraints of dwindling resources and growing population. Never has there been a more urgent time in our history where we need to consider critically the way we occupy our urban settings and what we do with the resources that are available for all of us. The image at the bottom of the page was Banana Street, and I say was Banana Street because this street today has been decimated. It endorses sustainable relationships both environmentally and socially. It is driven informally by a desire to be different to the status quo. If the image at the top of the screen is prescribed by a set of antiquated rules and regulations as right, then the image at the bottom of the screen, according to the bureaucratic system, is wrong. Sustainably wrong, socially wrong, and environmentally wrong. Rich, diverse and abundant, nurturing people, planet and place, yet deemed wrong for the challenges that we face collectively as a society today. And finally, we thought we'd finish with this. It's a simple quote from Buckmaster Fuller. And he says, in order to change the existing paradigm, you don't struggle to try and change the problematic model. You create a new model and make the old one obsolete.